I thought it would be a good test of Google Bard and Bing Chat to give them a prompt to write a Southern Gothic ghost story and see which one did the best. I'll use the same prompt for both and I won't be editing them, only posting them as is. I'll only use generic stock video clips, no Midjourney graphics, to keep the playing field level. Give them a listen and see which you think wrote the best story. I'll let you know what I thought at the end of the video. Here's the prompt I used for both. I'll put it in the description for you to try for yourself. Write me a Southern Gothic ghost story set in modern-day Charleston, South Carolina. The main characters are a husband and wife, no kids, who just moved into an old mansion. The ghost should have a tragic backstory. The story should be both suspenseful and heartwarming. The characters must be well developed. The plot must be engaging. The length needs to be between 1,500 and 2,000 words. Google Bard gives you 3 drafts to pick from. Here's the one I thought was best out of the 3. The Old Mansion. The old mansion loomed over the city, its dark windows like empty eyes. It had been abandoned for years, and no one dared to go near it. But then, a young couple, Ben and Sarah, decided to move in. They were both artists, and they were drawn to the mansion's atmosphere of creativity and mystery. The first few weeks in the mansion were uneventful. Ben and Sarah worked on their art, and they explored the mansion's many rooms. They found a library with dusty books, a ballroom with a grand piano, and a garden with overgrown flowers. One night, Ben and Sarah were asleep in bed when they were awakened by a noise. They got up and went to investigate. The noise seemed to be coming from the library. Ben and Sarah went into the library and saw a figure sitting at the desk. The figure was a woman, and she was crying. Ben and Sarah were startled, but they approached the woman. "Are you okay?" Ben asked. The woman looked up at them, and her eyes were filled with tears. "I am lost," she said. "I cannot find my way home." Ben and Sarah looked at each other, then back at the woman. "We can help you," Sarah said. "We can take you home." The woman smiled. "Thank you," she said. "I would be grateful." Ben and Sarah took the woman's hand, and they led her out of the library. They walked through the mansion, and the woman told them her story. Her name was Abigail, and she had lived in the mansion many years ago. She had been a young woman, and she had been in love with a man named James. But James had been killed in a duel, and Abigail had been heartbroken. Abigail had never recovered from James's death, and she had eventually died of a broken heart. But her spirit had remained in the mansion, and she had been waiting for someone to help her find her way home. Ben and Sarah listened to Abigail's story, and they were moved by her sadness. They promised to help her find her way home, and they took her to the cemetery where James was buried. Abigail knelt at James's grave, and she cried. She told James how much she had loved him, and she said goodbye. Then, Abigail stood up, and she turned to Ben and Sarah. "Thank you," she said. "You have helped me find my way home." Abigail smiled, and then she was gone. Ben and Sarah watched as she disappeared into the mist. Ben and Sarah were both silent for a moment. Then, Ben said, "That was something." Sarah nodded. "It was," she said. "I'm glad we could help her." Ben and Sarah went back to the mansion, and they continued to live there. They never saw Abigail again, but they never forgot her. And they always remembered the night they helped her find her way home. The end. That was Google Bard's tale. What did you think? Now, here's Bing Chat's attempt, running in creative mode. The Haunting of Magnolia Manor. Magnolia Manor was a grand old house that stood on the outskirts of Charleston, South Carolina. It had been built in the late 1800s by a wealthy cotton merchant named Edward Beaumont, who had spared no expense in making it a lavish and comfortable home for his family. The house had a sweeping staircase, a ballroom, a library, a conservatory, and dozens of rooms, each with its own fireplace and chandelier. The grounds were equally impressive, with a fountain, a gazebo, a rose garden, and a grove of magnolia trees that gave the house its name. Edward Beaumont had been a kind and generous man, who had treated his workers well and donated to many charities. He had been happily married to his wife, Amelia, who had borne him 3 children, Edward Jr., Elizabeth, and Emily. The Beaumonts had been the envy of Charleston society, until tragedy struck. In 1899, a fire broke out in the house, killing Edward Sr. and his 2 daughters. Only Amelia and Edward Jr. survived, but they were scarred by the loss and the guilt. Amelia became a recluse, rarely leaving her room or speaking to anyone. Edward Jr. inherited the house and the business, but he was a bitter and cruel man, who exploited his workers and neglected his mother. He also developed a gambling addiction, and soon lost most of his fortune to debts and lawsuits. In 1905, Edward Jr. decided to sell the house and move away from Charleston. He hired an auctioneer to appraise the house and its contents, and planned to leave as soon as possible. However, on the night before the auction, he was found dead in his bed, with a bullet wound in his chest and a revolver in his hand. The coroner ruled it a suicide, but some people whispered that it was murder. The house remained unsold for many years, as rumors of its haunted nature spread throughout the town. People claimed to hear voices, footsteps, screams, and laughter coming from the house at night. Some said they saw lights flickering in the windows, or shadows moving across the walls. Others said they felt cold spots, or sudden gusts of wind, or touches on their skin. No one dared to enter the house or even approach it too closely. The house fell into decay and disrepair, until it was bought by a developer in 2020. He planned to demolish the house and build a luxury hotel on the land. However, he faced many obstacles and delays in his project. His workers complained of strange noises and sensations in the house. His equipment malfunctioned or broke down. His permits were denied or revoked. His investors backed out or sued him. He finally gave up and put the house back on the market. That's how Jake and Laura Collins came to own Magnolia Manor. Jake was a successful lawyer who had always dreamed of living in a historic mansion. Laura was a freelance writer who loved old houses and their stories. They had been married for 5 years, but they had no children yet. They had been living in a small apartment in downtown Charleston, until they saw an online listing for Magnolia Manor. The price was unbelievably low for such a large and beautiful property. The pictures showed a faded but elegant house that needed some restoration but still retained its charm. The description mentioned its rich history and its potential as a bed and breakfast or a museum. Jake and Laura were instantly smitten by the house. They contacted the seller and arranged to see it in person. They drove to the outskirts of town and followed the directions to the house. They gasped when they saw it for the first time. It was even more impressive than they had imagined. It loomed over them like a castle, with its tall columns, its wide porch, its ornate windows, and its majestic roof. It looked like it belonged in another era, another world. They parked their car in front of the gate and got out. They walked up to the door and rang the bell. No one answered. They rang again. Still no answer. They tried the knob. It was unlocked. They pushed open the door and stepped inside. They were greeted by a blast of cold air that made them shiver. They looked around. They were in a large foyer with marble floors, wood-paneled walls, and crystal chandeliers. A staircase curved up to the second floor on their left. A hallway led to other rooms on their right. A fireplace stood opposite them on the far wall. The place was dark and dusty. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling. Furniture was covered with sheets. Paintings were faded and cracked. The air smelled of mold and decay. They felt a sense of awe and curiosity. They also felt a sense of dread and unease. They shrugged it off. They were here to see their dream house, not to be scared by some old ghost stories. They decided to explore the house on their own, since the seller was nowhere to be found. They walked through the hallway and entered the first room on their right. It was the library. It was filled with shelves of books, some of them ancient and rare. A desk stood in the center of the room, with a leather chair behind it. A globe, a lamp, and a magnifying glass were on the desk. A fireplace was on the wall, with a portrait of a man above it. They recognized the man from the online listing. It was Edward Beaumont Sr., the original owner of the house. He looked like a distinguished gentleman, with a gray beard, a black suit, and a kind smile. He also looked like he was watching them. They felt a chill run down their spines. They moved on to the next room. It was the ballroom. It was a huge space with hardwood floors, velvet curtains, and crystal chandeliers. A grand piano stood in one corner, next to a window. A fireplace was on the opposite wall, with a portrait of a woman above it. They recognized the woman from the online listing. It was Amelia Beaumont, the wife of Edward Sr. and the mother of Edward Jr. and his sisters. She looked like a beautiful lady, with blonde hair, a blue dress, and a pearl necklace. She also looked like she was crying. They felt a pang of pity in their hearts. They moved on to the next room. It was the conservatory. It was a glass-enclosed room with plants, flowers, and statues. A fountain bubbled in the center, surrounded by benches. A door led to the garden outside. A fireplace was on the wall, with a portrait of two girls above it. They recognized the girls from the online listing. They were Elizabeth and Emily Beaumont, the daughters of Edward Sr. and Amelia, and the sisters of Edward Jr. They looked like sweet children, with curly hair, white dresses, and matching bows. They also looked like they were laughing. They felt a surge of joy in their souls. They moved on to the next room. It was the master bedroom. It was a spacious room with a king-sized bed, a dresser, a closet, and a mirror. A balcony overlooked the garden below. A fireplace was on the wall, with no portrait above it. They wondered why there was no portrait here. They walked over to the bed and pulled back the covers. They screamed. There was a skeleton on the bed, wearing a nightgown and holding a revolver. A bullet hole was in its skull. A note was on its chest. It read, "I'm sorry, Mother. I can't live with this guilt anymore. Forgive me." It was signed, Edward Jr. They realized they had found the body of Edward Beaumont Jr., who had killed himself in this room more than a century ago. They also realized they were not alone in this room. They turned around and saw him standing behind them. He looked like his portrait in the library, but older and angrier. He had blood on his shirt and his hand. He had a revolver in his other hand. He pointed it at them and said, "Get out of my house." He pulled the trigger. The end. That was Bing Chat's take on the prompt. Overall, I found Bing's story to be the better one. It told a more complete backstory, had better character development, and built more suspense. It was a bit lacking on the heartwarming side though, especially with the ending. However, it would be a good base for someone to expand into a better tale. I thought Google Bard's attempt to be rather generic. It didn't do as well in key areas like character development and building suspense. But, it did manage to get in a heartwarming ending. In running several story writing and idea brainstorming tests with both generative AIs, I've found them both to have some quirks. Bing Chat is rather slow. Maybe this is because it's typing to the screen as it generates, or perhaps its engine or servers aren't as powerful. It will sometimes stop in the middle of what looked like a good story, erase it and quit on you. Very disappointing. However, the quality of the story, if you get one, is usually good, at least as a base, provided your prompt is good. Google Bard responds rather quickly most of the time. It gives you 3 drafts to choose from. And, you have the option to export the results to Google Docs, which is a nice touch. Where Bard does the best is when it's spinning an article from web search results, such as writing an article for a tech blog. With fiction and more abstract non-fiction writing, it's much more limited in what it can produce. Also, I've noticed when using Bard, it tends to generate slight variations of the same story over and over. Do you agree? Which one do you think wrote the best Southern Gothic ghost story? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.